All right, well, I'm super excited to be here. I'll give you just a little bit of background about myself. My name's Daniel Hatch, and I have a PhD in clinical psychology. And what that means is that I'm trained as a researcher, but also I'm trained as a therapist. And so I work with usually around 7 to 10 people a week doing therapy, and I cover lots of different things in my work doing therapy. I work with anxiety disorders, depression. I do a lot with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I work with victims of sexual abuse. So I've kind of got that part of my life where I do quite a bit of work just helping individuals like rationally deal with and overcome any kind of like psychological challenges that they have. My day job, though, is as a professor of psychology at Southern Utah University. The two different parts of my life, they work really well together because all of the classes that I teach are usually classes about how to do psychotherapy. So I teach an abnormal psychology class where we go over all of the different disorders. I teach a class on how to do therapy, an introduction to psychotherapy class. And I also teach a group dynamics class, and finally a positive psychology class. And positive psychology, if you don't know, is the science of happiness. And I spend a whole semester going through the different scientific, there's hundreds of different like scientific ideas about what makes people happy. And I try to focus on the ones that have the best and most research. And one of those lectures that I do in that class is on willpower and self-control and how it impacts our habits and the habits that we make. And so I'm going to talk today extensively about that. And I've been asked to try to apply this to you guys. I think it's broadly applicable. There are lots and lots of different ways that you could apply these ideas with really any behavior that you want to increase, as well as any behavior that you want to decrease, right? It's just simply a matter of the goals that you set. And all of these principles that we'll talk about will help you set goals a little bit more efficiently and achieve them a little bit more efficiently. Now, specifically, I think you could really apply this to study habits. Lots of times we have ideas about what makes us effective at retaining information and doing well in class tests and exams and papers. But oftentimes the success or lack thereof comes down to how well you can set a goal to study and follow through on that goal to study. And that's really what we're going to talk a ton about today is, like I said, it's applicable to both study skills, but also really any goal that you have that you want to set to get better at. I should sort of add this important caveat that all of the research that I've looked at is based on a North American sample. There might be really interesting ways that this generalizes to South Koreans or really to any other culture, broadly speaking, that might not exactly be consistent with the results that I've found. So I'm actually super curious and would be really interested to hear back from any of you as you try to apply some of these principles. Do they work in the same way in your culture? And if not, what made it not work and what made it maybe work better in some cases? So I would love to hear back from you. I'll leave my email with the powers that be to potentially hear back from you, because I would totally encourage you to contact me that way. So to begin with, though, it'll be helpful if you think about and write down like a list of goals that you want to accomplish over the next 2 to 3 months. Because in a way, as we go through this lecture, if you can refer back to those and think about how you can take the idea or principle that we're talking about and apply it to that particular context, I think this will be a lot more meaningful for you in that way. So let's take a couple of minutes here. You can pause the video. I won't pause, but you can pause the video and just think about 2 to 3 goals that you really, really want to accomplish. And maybe really focus on just one of them as we progress throughout this little mini lecture on how to achieve goals and how to take advantage of both your self-control and willpower in more efficient and effective ways. So to begin with, I want to start with an idea about passive leisure. Now, it's kind of a weird statement, but passive leisure essentially is when you sort of get stuck or tripped up or maybe even kind of hooked into an activity that you're doing that because of the pre-existing habits that you have, you just kind of get pulled into that. So let me give you an example. Let's say your name is Kathy and you have a whole bunch of weekend plans, right? Some of those plans might be in southern Utah, we love to mountain bike, so maybe you have plans to go mountain biking, right? Or maybe you have like a pickup soccer game that you want to go and do, in the afternoon. You can't do that right now in southern Utah because it's pretty cold and it's probably going to snow on you if you tried it. But let's say that was your weekend plans, and maybe even you have like a paper in a class that you've got to work on. Maybe it's a paper in even this class. So here's where passive leisure comes in. Let's say the morning that you've got all these plans and like things that you want to accomplish and get done, that you kind of wake up and you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, I'll just check out and see what's on TV, right? Maybe I'll scroll through Netflix first before I kind of get into the grind of all these goals that I want to accomplish. I'm going to take a look and see, and you notice, like Kathy might notice in this example, that HBO maybe has this Game of Thrones marathon that's running. And suddenly, before you know it, you've just spent the last 4.5 hours productively watching Game of Thrones instead of doing any of these things that you had planned to do. And this really is what passive leisure is all about. That we have these habit loops, we call them, that once we start them, it's pretty hard to stop doing them. Some of these habit loops are kind of nice, right? And we have this thing maybe where you're like every night before you go to bed, you probably have some kind of routine that you do. If you're like me, you maybe wash your face, you brush your teeth, but you have this routine and you've done it forever, and it's kind of like a passive routine. You don't have to take much thought. You don't have to decide every night whether or not you're going to brush your teeth. You just know you're going to do it. And in the same kind of way, sometimes TV watching or surfing the web or watching something on YouTube is the same thing, where you can start that habit loop, and because of its passive nature, it just kind of sucks you in, and before you know it, you've spent like 4 hours watching something that you had maybe planned to spend 45 minutes doing. If you think about it, the television remote and Netflix, these are kind of like the paths of least resistance, right? Once you pick up that remote and turn on the TV, or you open up Netflix and start watching something, it's pretty easy, it's pretty convenient, it's pretty habitual, and like it says here, it's pretty mind-numbing. And that can sort of take you and untrack you pretty easily from things that you maybe really wanted to accomplish, like going mountain biking or, a pickup soccer game or something like that. What's interesting is there's some cool research that suggests that passive leisure things are actually not bad things if they're like time limited. So one of a famous positive psychology researcher, his name's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. It's a really cool name. What he found is that passive leisure engaged in for about 30 minutes or less is actually kind of a productivity boost. That it makes your mood increase, and that increased mood does this thing from Barbara Fredrickson's research called the broaden and build theory. It makes you more creative. But what he also found is that anything past 30 minutes kind of doesn't help you at all. It saps your energy. It creates this, what he called, I love his wording here, psychic entropy, which just means you kind of like slow everything down and you get stuck. And in this case, like in this example, you get stuck maybe watching a television show like Game of Thrones for just way, way longer than you anticipated. Now, we have passive leisure. We also have this thing called active leisure. And active leisure is kind of different. In this case, active leisure are things that require concentration. They facilitate engagement just by their nature. They make us more focused on the activity at hand. It also fosters motivation. It gets you more excited and willing and wanting to do more things. And it leaves you feeling this really profound sense of enjoyment. So this would be like all the stuff that you do, like hobbies, maybe board games, some sports that you do, running, that kind of stuff would all kind of fall into this active leisure category. And it's pretty healthy and good for you. And what's interesting, hobbies are 2.5 times, and sports are 3 times more likely to create elevated joy than watching television is. And in North America, people spend, this is I think an astoundingly high number, 4 times as many hours watching TV as they do engaging in sports and hobbies. Because passive leisure is just so much easier to start doing. And that'd be a question, if you were here, I would ask you, like, what is it about, well, first of all, what is it about spending like this passive leisure? Why is it so easy to get stuck doing it? So maybe take a second and just ask yourself the answer to that question. And then, why would we spend 4 times the amount of time doing something that has less than half the chance of making us feel good? Why don't we choose active leisure? Not just why do we choose passive leisure? And I think if you sort of pause yourself for a second and try to answer that, and just think, why don't we do more mountain biking and less TV? Why do we do more TV and less mountain biking, for instance? And as you think about that, it's probably because it kind of takes a fair amount of effort to get going doing the hobby like mountain biking. Whereas passive leisure, it's so easy and it just kind of like we can slide into it with just minimal effort. Now this is going to become an important piece here in a second when we talk about a different idea called activation energy. And you'll see how we can take a passive leisure thing and make it harder to do, and an active leisure thing and make it easier to do, and that will profoundly impact how we are able to accomplish and continue doing goals. I think this is an interesting statement. Americans actually find that free time is more difficult to enjoy than work is. That'd be a great question. If you were here, I would ask you that. What do you make of that? Why is it that Americans think that free time is harder to enjoy than work is? And one of the things that you might say to that, one of the responses you might have is, there's so much more freedom when it comes to play. And in that sense, there are lots more options. And the things that are going to bring us joy, they take a bit more effort than this passive leisure kind of stuff does, and we can get sucked into it so easily. So if we want to change from passive to active leisure, then we've got to like think strategically, because we have these passive leisure activities that occur all over in our lives, right? If you think about it, you probably have some kind of routine that you do right now before you even start doing your homework, right? If you flip on your computer and like turn on whatever your platform is to check your class materials and assignments, probably before you do that, you probably have like 5 or 6 websites that you go and check. That's a passive leisure kind of thing. There's some interesting data here. The average employee gets interrupted from work 11 times every 11 minutes, every 11 minutes in their day. So again, the average employee gets interrupted from work every 11 minutes, and then about half that time is needed to recover from that interruption. So we're just highly distracted, and we have lots of passive leisure things that are right in front of us drawing our attention, and every 11 minutes or so, it works. It kind of sucks us in. So this idea, though, that I alluded to before of activation energy is the number and the size of the obstacles that must be overcome to start a task. Now think about that for a second, and let me maybe give you an example that would help you understand what activation energy is. Let's say for a second that you want to learn to play the guitar. Activation energy is the number and size of the obstacles that must be overcome to begin this task of learning to play the guitar. So what we want to do, if you look down here at the bottom of the slides, you want to lower the activation energy for habits that you want to adopt, and you want to raise it for the habits that you want to avoid. So let's say that you have a goal. You say, I want to play the guitar right when I get home from school every day at 4 o'clock. And that you kind of like start to track that behavior, and you notice that usually when you get home from school that you check out Netflix for a while, maybe spend 3 or 4 hours watching it on your television, which means that you didn't practice the guitar at all. So go back to this idea, right? Activation energy is the number and size of the obstacles that must be overcome to begin a task. And we want to increase the activation energy for like the number of obstacles for the tasks that we don't want to do, and we want to decrease the activation energy for the tasks that we do want to do. So in a sense, you want to think, how can I make playing the guitar a lot easier? What are all of the obstacles that have to happen before I can play the guitar? And just think that through for a second. What are they? If you're like me, you probably have the guitar in a case, and that case is like in your closet. And then the music might be, in my case, it's in the piano bench of my wife's piano. So then to be able to play the guitar, the activation energy is, I have to go get the guitar out of the case, I have to get the case out of the closet, I have to set up the music stand, I have to put the guitar on the couch and then start practicing. But before even that, I have to go get the music out of the bench and set everything up. So if I want to decrease the activation energy to play the guitar, what could I do? And in this instance, you would say something like, what if you buy a guitar stand and set the guitar stand up right in front of the door when you walk in? And you have a music stand already set up with the music on it, and you leave the guitar case in the closet because you don't need it anymore. So then the first thing that you see when you walk in the door is the guitar, the music, and it's all easy. Only thing you have to do is just pick up and start playing. You've just reduced the activation energy. Now, at first you might be thinking, is that a big deal? Is that going to really make a huge difference? And I will say this to you, just as an example. In my basement, I have a 15-foot screen and an awesome stereo system. I love watching movies, and so I set up my basement to watch movies just like the best kinds, right? And what I've found, though, is that I end up watching my movies on a tiny phone in my bed because it's just easier to watch it here, and the sound is horrible. It's not great compared to what I could. If I took like 25 seconds more, I could walk downstairs, turn on everything, and have a great, awesome movie experience. But I almost never do that just because this activation energy is so high. So in that sense, you can kind of see how just that small change, it actually could make a difference, right? It might make a huge difference as far as like making that guitar that much easier to do. Now, we can also add this idea of activation energy to the thing that's messing us up. Let's say that I'm watching on television, I'm using like a remote control to like flip through the channels, right? And that's the thing that like stops me from playing the guitar. Well, the activation energy says, this principle would say, increase the activation energy for the thing you don't want to do. So think about that for a second. What would that look like? If the TV is my problem, how can I make the TV harder to do? So I'm just going to pause for a second. You guys think about that. What could you do to make that a little bit easier? Sorry, what I meant to say is to make it harder, make the TV watching harder. So one thing that I've thought of, I've actually done this. This is a true life story. This is me. But what I did is I took the remote control for the TV and I took the batteries out of it. And I put them in like the furthest room in my house away. And then I took the remote itself and I put it in my kids' drawer in the top part of their closet. And then I logged out on my TV from Netflix. So now think about the size and number of obstacles that have to happen before I could ever watch Netflix on my TV. It just got a lot harder, right? To do this, I'd have to like go find the batteries in my one son's room, go to my daughter's room and get the remote control out, put them together, sit down on the couch, and then this is the really painful part, log into Netflix using the remote control, putting in an email and a password. And that just takes too much time. And I've got this thing right in front of me because I decreased the activation energy for playing the guitar. It's right there in front of me, all set up with the music ready to go. And guess what happened? I'm way more likely to do the guitar habit than I am to fall into this bad habit of watching Netflix. And this is the key. This is the idea behind activation energy, and it's broadly applicable. All the things that are getting in your way, make them harder to do. It seems kind of intuitive. It seems like a no-brainer. But I'm telling you, if you have to go find the remote in your daughter's room and the batteries in your son's room, or actually the reverse of that, and you have to type in the password and email every time, you're going to watch Netflix a lot less often. And if this guitar is set up ready for you to play, it's just sitting there kind of glowing in front of you, you're going to play the guitar a lot more because it's that much easier to do. So what we've done is we've made passive leisure things harder to do because of the activation energy. And we've reduced the activation energy for these active leisure things. And suddenly you're just way, way more likely to do it. So keep that in the back of your head. There are lots and lots of examples of this application of activation energy. Let's take one, right? Let's say you spend too much money shopping online. One thing you could do, this is sort of like a famous thing that people do, is they take their credit card and they freeze it in a huge chunk of ice. Think about how much activation energy it would take you if you're on Amazon shopping or the Amazon equivalent, wherever you are. And you're like, ooh, I really want to buy this, I don't know, pair of pants or new shoes. And you're like, God, these shoes are awesome. I've got to get them. And then you're like, oh, my credit card is in a 3-foot block of ice in my freezer. Are you going to take the time to take the ice pick out and like chisel through that? Probably not, right? The activation energy in that case is so high that the probability that you buy those shoes, at least in that moment, is almost zero. Because you're like, it would take like 3 hours for that block of ice to finally melt so I could get the credit card out, so I could get the numbers and the little code on the back, right? It's a great example of this idea. If that's actually a big problem for you, if you increase the activation energy so much, it just becomes something that there's something easier that you're just likely to do in its place, and it makes it a whole lot easier. Let's say you stay up too late watching Netflix. I don't know if this ever happened to you, but it happens to me once in a while. I had this actually a client that I had to do this with, and what we decided we would do to increase the activation energy for him is we set up his router, so for his internet, we made it turn off at 11:45, and we put the router in like the furthest corner of his house, and then we made the password like 85 digits or something ridiculous, just like a huge long password. So it would take some serious amount of time for him to like go back and forth if he wanted to extend his time. And that was it. That's all it took. And that guy, he never had problems watching Netflix past, like 11:30 or midnight, I think is what we set it for, ever again, because it just took so much energy to go down to the basement in the furthest corner and type in this 85-digit password. He's like, no, I'll just go to bed. And that's how we solve the problem in a lot of ways. So keep in mind, right, the key here is you want to lower the activation energy for habits that you want to adopt, and you want to raise the activation energy for habits that you want to avoid. And again, apply this to like studying, for instance. You could apply it to studying, I think, pretty easily. If there's something that's distracting you, make that thing harder to do. And if you need to study more often with more regularity, then make that activity that much easier, right? So you want to like have your computer all set up, have the book ready to go, right on the desk that you're going to do it. Set up beforehand, like the time of day, and make your environment really good and productive for studying. And then that's going to be that much easier. And then whatever's stopping you, make that thing super hard to do, and you'll be more successful at it. There are lots of these examples, right? One that often people talk about is beginning to exercise. So take a second, just answer that question. How can you increase the activation energy for stuff that you don't really want to do, maybe that stops you from exercising, and then decrease the activation energy for exercising? So as you think about that, you'd want to have let's say you exercise early in the morning. Maybe you just put on your exercise clothes before you even go to bed, and you get your shoes out ready to go. So let's say you're running, right? All you have to do is just literally roll out of bed, slide on your shoes, and you're good to go as far as the run goes. And let's say maybe that you can get distracted by, I don't know, the internet, right? Maybe you log out of every social media account that you have that could distract you. And it takes not long, but enough time to put the email and the password into all these different accounts. Maybe you delete the app on your phone because that distracts you in the morning, right? You just want to make those distractions like a lot harder to do and make the exercising a lot easier to do. There's some interesting studies with this. For instance, in the U.S., ice cream consumption is cut in half in elementary schools when the lid is closed on the ice cream cooler. So just if elementary school students, so these are like 5-year-olds to like 10-year-olds, if they have to lift the lid up, half of them don't want to do that because it's just too much effort, too much activation energy, and it cuts it in half. There are probably hundreds of daily distractions that you have in your life that if you increase the activation energy on them would just make you way, way more efficient, and then decrease the activation energy on all the stuff that you want to do more. And again, it sounds as if in some ways that this little tiny minor tweak wouldn't matter much. But even let's say it's like a 1% increase. That 1% increase of productivity day after day is kind of like compounding interest in a bank account. It just increases and you get better and better and better over time. All right, so that's our first principle. Our first key concept is Utilize this idea of activation energy when you create goals. Lower the activation energy for habits that you want to adopt and raise it for habits that you want to avoid. I want to spend just a second talking about a different concept now. This is the habit loop, and there are lots of sort of iterations of this. It came really from a researcher and a psychologist named B.F. Skinner, and his was stimulus, response, reward. Now, I kind of like the language that you can see here in front of you because I think it clarifies things a little bit better, but it's the same idea, right? You have a cue, some kind of trigger, and then you have a routine, which is the habit itself, and then you have some kind of reward, like the reason why you're doing it. And if you want to change a particular habit loop, you just have to understand and really reverse engineer this particular loop. So there's lots of things that you can manipulate here. Let's say for a second, let's go to something maybe easy, right? Like let's say you have, I'm looking down at my own caffeine addiction. Let's say you want to reduce the amount of caffeine that you drink every day, right? Maybe you're drinking way too much coffee, or if you're like me, you're drinking way too much Diet Mountain Dew. You might want to first consider, what are all the triggers? What are the cues that make you want to drink Mountain Dew? Now, the framework for isolating the cues and tweaking them is this: location, time, emotional state, other people, and then any kind of immediately preceding action. And all of these cues are potentially the kinds of things that are like the trigger that make me, in this example, want to drink Mountain Dew. So, for instance, like let's say it's like late afternoon, but I notice that all the time around like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm like opening 3 or 4 cans of Mountain Dew and just pounding it. That cue is something I could manipulate, right? I might notice that that it seems like it's really consistently that time of day, right? So maybe I increase the activation energy for drinking Mountain Dew. I make sure that there's no Mountain Dew anywhere to be found in my environment at around 3 o'clock, and I have to go search for it. That's one way knowing the cue would make a huge difference. Now, there's all kinds of these cues really matter, right? The emotional state, maybe I'm like fatigued. What if I was maybe even super tired? That emotional state, understanding it is something I could also manipulate. If I'm fatigued, maybe I take a quick power nap, right? Or if I'm bored or want social interaction because I'm bored, that cue tells me what I need to do later to sort of change this whole habit up. So the cue really matters, and is something I think most people don't really look at. The next thing that you're going to want to do is identify the routine. So let's say that I feel like I've figured out that it's in the afternoon where I drink Mountain Dew, and that my emotional state is just I'm a little bit bored. My routine then is I walk down the hall and down the stairs, buy some Diet Mountain Dew, and in the meantime, as I'm walking up and down those stairs, I'm seeing people, and I actually pass the office of my best buddy, and we start talking and laughing, and then I go and buy the Mountain Dew, and then I go back upstairs. So understanding the cue helped me like recognize the habit loop itself, the routine. Now, if you think about this routine, there's lots of places to intervene. I might, for instance, realize, and this is where this reward piece comes in, that my routine has multiple rewards associated with it. And one of those rewards is this, that maybe it's just not the Mountain Dew itself that I like, or the caffeine specifically. Maybe it's that I like talking with my buddy. And in that sense, it's something I could achieve without ever even doing the Mountain Dew, right? Maybe I just manipulate that one variable because the reward is the social interaction and not the caffeine itself that's actually at play. So maybe I can eliminate just the caffeine and walk down the hall and talk with my buddy, and then I'm re-energized and not fatigued. So understanding this whole habit loop gives you multiple places where you can intervene. And the idea would be that you would figure out what the rewards are. Maybe it's the walking up and down the stairs, right? Maybe that's the part that it's actually the exercise, the moderate amount of exercise that kind of re-energizes me. And if that's the actual reward, then I don't need the Mountain Dew either, right? I could just walk outside and enjoy like a 10-minute walk and reduce my Mountain Dew consumption that way too. So in that sense, there are lots of ways you can manipulate both the cues, the habits themselves, the routine itself, and the rewards that are associated with it. But to be able to do that, you've got to understand this entire habit loop. So it kind of matters to make sure that when you're thinking, for instance, about how well you're studying, are there bad habits that get cued, have a routine and a specific reward that stop you from studying? And then maybe you pay attention to those cues, that routine and the reward specifically, and alter them, get the reward in a different way that still allows you to study effectively and efficiently. So keep that in mind. So that's our key concept number 2. Understand and be able to change habits through this habit loop. Take a quick second and identify any triggers that you want or that cue you for the particular bad habit that you want to change. Understand the routine itself because it gives you insights into all of the different rewards that are occurring, and then find different way to get those rewards met. That's why this key concept number 2 kind of matters as well. Once you really understand that habit loop, you're in a much, much better position to manipulate and eliminate bad habits that are getting in your way. And in a way, you can add in good habits that will accomplish the same exact reward and therefore facilitate your change. Okay, so I want to take a second now and talk about the value of self-control and kind of think about it in maybe a slightly different way than you're used to. So, self-control is one of the most significant predictors of college grades. This is a cool study. They used 200 college students and they examined the predictive power of a bunch of different markers. High school grades, SAT scores, a measure of self-control. They actually had 31 different personality variables as well that they looked at. Which one was the best predictor? Well, turns out high school grades was. But the second best predictor was self-control. And self-control beat out every one of all of the other variables, all 31 of those personality variables as well. It matters, like how well you can govern yourself and do the hard thing, do the thing that you need to do. So what if we think about self-control a little bit more, right? There's lots of studies on this, and we could try to understand ways to take advantage of the self-control that we have or maybe even don't have. So I want you to think for a second about a particular goal that you want to achieve, right? Remember you made a list earlier. Maybe it's a study skill one that you're trying to work on. It really could be anything though. One of the things that manipulates self-control that we're going to talk about is this idea called implementation intentions. So and this is tied to this question here. Research shows that our success or failure in self-regulation and goal achievement is determined before the fact, before we even start. Now think about what that could mean. What do we need to do before we even start the goal that could really profoundly impact how well we do at it? You've probably had like a goal. If you're like me, like I have a goal of there's a book I'm trying to read, right? I'm trying to read it every day. I've sort of had that goal in my mind for a long time. But that's it. That's kind of as far as the goals go. I know I want to do it. But this says before the success or failure of that particular goal is determined before I even start. So we have a goal intention, right? We have a desire maybe to do some kind of thing. But what an implementation intention is our ability to define our plan of action and specify exactly the steps necessary to achieve the goal. And that's what they mean here by this idea that it's determined before you even start the goal. If I make an implementation intention, I'm going to define a plan of action and specify the exact steps necessary to do it. I'm going to say to myself, no matter what happens before I go to bed, before my head hits the pillow and the light goes out, that's the moment that that's what I'm going to read. I'm going to read that book that I've always wanted to read. So I'm going to create some environmental markers to sort of remind me. I'm going to say, yeah, I'm going to get in bed, do my regular routine, brush my teeth, wash my face. I'm going to get in bed and I'm going to leave the book on the pillow. That's activation energy. I'm going to make sure that I find the book rewarding. That's that key concept number 2. That's the habit loop piece. And then I'm going to make sure, as I think about this, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to do this every night at exactly the same time. And I'm going to say, if I get tired, then I may start a little bit earlier. But I'm going to set the time up. I'm going to say I'm going to read. Let's say I go to bed at 11 o'clock at night. At 10:45, I might even set an alarm on my phone to remind me to go read my book. These are all implementation intentions. These are the exact plans that I need to do to make that happen. And they matter, they're huge. I mean, it sort of seems like, again, like a no-brainer, but how often do we have a goal that we're like, yeah, I need to do that, or I want to do that, and we just never get around to doing it? If you stop and pause and make an implementation intention right now for that goal that you have, you're way more likely to do it. So in that sense, if exercising, wanting to exercise more is the goal that you want to change, what would the implementation intentions look like? You would say, okay, I'm going to get up at this time and go for a run. Let's make it more complicated though. Let's say you wanted to start lifting weights, for instance. You would say, all right, I'm going to get up at this time and lift weights. I'm going to plan out and do this exact set of weights every time, so that you've made this plan of action of the exact workout that you're going to do. And you want to plan this all out beforehand, because once it's planned out, it makes the moment where you have to decide a whole lot easier. There's actually tons of different research on this, and it's super interesting stuff. In this instance, students were asked to describe a difficult and an easy project to be completed over Christmas break. And then they were asked whether or not they had specific plans about where they were going to do it, when they would do it, and how they would get started for both the easy and the hard task. And the results were interesting. They found that for the difficult projects, 2/3 of the participants with an actual plan of when they were going to start, what they were going to do, and how they were going to do it actually did it. Whereas only 1/4 of the students who didn't have an implementation plan finished their projects over winter break. If you just said, I got to write this big paper, in graduate school, you're always like, oh, during Christmas break, I'm going to write all of my dissertation, and then you just don't do any of it. It's because you didn't have an implementation intention. You didn't create the exact plan of action that you needed to do to be more successful at it. For the easier projects, though, implementation intentions didn't matter, which kind of makes sense. If it's sort of an easy thing, you could just do it anytime. It doesn't require lots of planning at all. So it's really for more complex tasks, probably more like those active leisure kinds of goals. In a follow-up experiment, this one's kind of cool. Students were asked to write a paper on their holiday tradition and submit it to the professor within 48 hours of Christmas Eve. So in a moment where you're just the least likely to think about school, right, within 48 hours of Christmas Eve. And what they did is, half of them were told, I want you to make an implementation intention. I want you to plan out the exact minute and the exact day that you're going to do this. And I want you to plan out exactly what it's going to look like, and think about and maybe set some reminders on your phone and on your calendar. And the students that had implementations, as you might guess, they did it, right? 75% of them actually finished the paper and turned it in, whereas only about 33% of the non-implementation intentions. It's such a small thing, right? Just simply planning out and creating this action plan makes a huge difference as far as what you actually are able to accomplish. So think about for a second, why does that work so well? Why do implementation intentions create almost 100% more likely that you're going to do the thing? And this is kind of the key that they found, that the mental and environmental markers that you sort of put in place, they matter. The environment kind of reminds you, oh yeah, no, I said at 10 o'clock at 10:30 I was going to read my book every night. And here I am, this is the time. And as I'm getting in bed to lie down, I realize I remember, because of my environment kind of cues me and reminds me this is when I was going to read. Or in this studies example, just after they got done unwrapping their presents on Christmas Day, they had promised themselves that they were going to go and send the paper off, and they finish and they're like, oh yeah, I did remind myself, or I did tell myself I was going to go do this at this time. And so these mental environmental markers, they make it more efficient. And what's really cool is over time, they become way more automatic. Once you set up the implementation intention and you do it consistently enough, you don't have to decide every day whether or not you're going to brush your teeth, because you just know you're going to brush them every night, right? It doesn't require any more mental energy, no more decision making. You just know you're going to do it. And that's really what a habit is all about. But implementation intentions set you up to get into that kind of a groove. That you just know at 10:30 I'm going to read that book every night. And you just have done it so often because of the implementation intentions that it doesn't require any more thought or effort to do it. This will play into our next kind of key concept here in a second. But it works so well for two reasons, right? It creates these environmental cues. Like you say, I'm going to study when my roommates all go to class during my lunchtime. It's quiet, it's a great time. So when you see your roommates all getting up to go, it cues you, it creates this environmental cue. Oh yeah, this is when I was going to study. That's when I decided. That was my implementation intention. It becomes part of this daily routine, and you don't have to like think about it. You're passing control into the environment of this particular behavior, and it becomes a lot easier. The second thing is that this goal-directed behavior, it requires just a whole lot less effort and energy. We talk a lot about automatic processes in psychology and effortful processes, and they make a difference, right? The automatic processes are things that just take little self-control, like driving. You don't have to think about driving, you just do it. However, you want to make your goals in the same kind of way. You want them to become automatic without taking a whole lot of thought. You don't have to think about whether you're going to exercise because you've created the implementation intention, you've been doing it so long you don't even think about it anymore. You just do it in the same way that you just brush your teeth at night. And that's what over time, this implementation intention piece, that's why it works so well. Okay, so our key concept number 3 is create implementation intentions for each goal. Each goal component, that's kind of an important piece. That you want to break down the goal and make an implementation intention for each piece of it so that you know you can take advantage of these environmental and mental markers to get going on it. Okay, now our last thing is this a really interesting study about willpower and how willpower is kind of a muscle. So this is the classic study. In this study, Baumeister and Tice got fresh baked cookies on a plate. So just imagine a pile of chocolate chip cookies next to a bowl of red and white radishes. Now, I don't even really know what radishes are. If you have lots of salads, you might know what a radish is. But they're like a really strong flavored, kind of crispy little red vegetable. I don't think they taste great. So a pile of cookies, a bowl of radishes. And they asked the participants to come on in. These were just students, actually. They asked these students, to come in and hang out for a while, and they were unattended. And they were told either to eat only from the bowl of radishes, so half of them were told that, and half of them were told they could eat whatever they wanted to eat. The other group, like they just said, you can eat whatever you want, or they even told some of them, just eat the cookies, right? Because everyone wants to eat the cookies. And then afterwards, the two groups, right? So a group that couldn't eat cookies, even though the cookies were right in front of them, had to eat radishes. And then the other group who just could eat whatever they wanted to, but ate cookies. They had each volunteer try to solve a puzzle. But the trick here is that the puzzle was designed to be unsolvable. And what they wanted to see is how long will they persist at trying to solve this particular unsolvable problem. And this is where it gets interesting, right? They timed the students in this puzzle task to see how long it took them to give up, essentially. And what they found is that the people who had eaten chocolate chip cookies kept working on the puzzle about 19 minutes longer on average than the participants who couldn't eat the cookies and had to eat the radishes. So the group that sort of noshed on those radishes, they messed up on that puzzle test. They didn't last very long. They lasted just 8 minutes on average. Now think about this for a second, because it's kind of a powerful idea. What it says, in effect, is this, that we have a limited supply of willpower each day. And we use it on all kinds of decisions, like in this case, the decision to not eat really nice, warm, enticing cookies, or to not eat those but to eat radishes. That takes up and saps some of the willpower that we have. And then when we're in the next willpower task in this study of trying to solve this unsolvable problem, we have less willpower to work with. We give up sooner. So it tells you that willpower really is kind of like a muscle. It's an amount of energy that we have. It sort of replenishes each day, but it takes us some time to kind of work through it and put ourselves in a position where if we are using it all up on sort of like meaningless stuff, then we might not be able to do the things that we really want to do. Now, there are lots of ways to take advantage of this. Turns out this willpower muscle is kind of like a muscle in your body as well, that you can exercise it. And over time, you can make it more. You can make that capacity, if it was here, if you're doing a willpower like exercise, you can make it even bigger. So in this case, there's an interesting study that they've done. Like, you could create these willpower-like training regimes or regimens, and they aren't things that you might think. They're actually things like physical exercise or consistently practicing an instrument or a sport. And the people that did that seemed to have a bit more willpower as they measured it over time. It increased their willpower. So it is kind of like a muscle that you can make bigger. But think about this component, because this is where I think you can sort of apply this idea. And I say this kind of statement, I love it: do the hard thing first. Now think about that for a second. If willpower is an expendable resource that you only have a limited amount of each day, if you start your day with the hardest thing and get it done first, that's when you have the most amount of willpower. And then your day gets easier over the course of the day, but so does your willpower. It kind of matches it, so that you kind of guarantee that you're going to get the hardest thing done first, and then each subsequent thing requires less willpower, and it's kind of nice because that's when you have less willpower. So there's lots of benefits to doing the hard thing first, right? It makes your day easier because you've utilized the most resources that you have from a willpower perspective first and gotten that thing done. It makes your day more productive because maybe that's the thing that you had to do, the thing you just don't like to do. You had to do it and you got it done. It makes each moment of your day easier and easier and easier, right? There's a different theory called the peak end theory that basically says that the way that we remember the entirety of the experiences is if it ends positively. And in this case, that's exactly what would be happening if your whole day, that you're doing this hard thing first, and then each thing gets easier, easier, and easier, and really kind of in a way more pleasant, and you're just going to be more successful at it. It wards off procrastination, if you think about it. Lots of times we like that hard thing we sort of save till the end, which doesn't make any sense from this research perspective, because that's when we have the least amount of research. That's when we have the least amount of willpower. And in that case, you might procrastinate it and never get it done. But doing it at the beginning means that you've got the most willpower. You're just more likely to be successful at it. So doing the hard thing first, really you could sort of sum it up this way by a statement that I love, which is this: don't give up what you want most for what you want right now. And that really captures and encapsulates this idea from the willpower perspective. So this is where we're going to wrap up today. Think about these broad concepts and how you can apply them to your own life. Take advantage of activation energy, right? Increase the activation energy for tasks that you don't want to do. Decrease it for the tasks that you do. Understand that habit loop, right? Recognize the cues, the routine, as well as the rewards, and manipulate them for the habits that you don't want to continue on. Create implementation intentions for all the things that you want to do, right? Look at the thing that you've been thinking about doing for a long time, and then specify when, where, and how you're going to do it, and each component of that goal, whatever it might be, and you'll be more successful at it. And finally, exercise your willpower muscle. Do hard things, and you'll get more willpower, and also do the hard thing first, and your day will get better and more efficient and easier. I actually look forward to hearing from all of you. Or some of you, or whoever wants to reply. I'd be curious to see, as you apply some of these things, what kind of intersections that there are that exist in your culture that make them work better or make them work worse, or if they work at all. Science suggests that they will work. At least they will, based on the science in North America. So that's why I'm pretty curious to see if there's these cultural intersections that might exist. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I would love someday to see you all in Utah and be able to teach a class with you there. But thank you again. Please let me know if you have any questions, and we'll see you later.